From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Colombia's Attorney General says authorities have identified the man who carried out the attack on the Santander Police School. The attack has killed at least 10 people and wounded 65.
We have successfully identified the person responsible of this heinous crime, of this terrorist act. He is Mr. José Aldemar Rojas Rodriguez. He was the one who entered the school at 9:30 this morning in a gray Nissan patrol truck.
President Iván Duque has visited the school where the attack took place. In a press conference, he condemned what occurred and said this has been an attack to all Colombians.
This attack has taken place in a school where there are young and unarmed students. This attack did not only target our security forces, our youth, our police. It is an attack against the Colombian people. This terrorist attack will be punished. We, Colombians, have never surrendered to terrorism.
Security forces have cordoned off the area. The blast at the General Santander School also shattered windows of the apartments in the neighborhood. The Minister of Defense has called it a terrorist attack, but so far, no one has claimed responsibility. Meanwhile, relatives of the victims have gathered at the scene hoping to get information about their loved ones. Ambulances are moving around the area close to the school in the south of Bogotá. And members of the FARC political party are speaking out against the violence. Senator Iván Cepeda says all Colombians must work for peace and not support the escalation of violence. Roy Barreras, a member of the Peace Commission at the Senate, also condemned the attack.
We regret the evil attack against our police that has cost several human lives. Any terrorist attack is a cowardly act. We want to express our solidarity with the victims. We hope to arrest those responsible and that we don't fall into a spiral of violence like the one we suffered in the conflict 20 years ago.
Our correspondent Tatiana Portela has the latest from Bogotá.
We are here outside the Santander Police School. It has been confirmed that at least 9 people died in the attack and more than 50 were injured and have been taken to different hospitals in the capital. The international community has condemned the bombing, which happened around 10 in the morning local time, after a car filled with explosives entered the school. President Iván Duque and the Minister of Defense came to the school to give a press conference about the incident.
Thank you, Tatiana, for that report. Hundreds of Honduran migrants have left Guatemala City as they continue their trek to the United States. The migrants say their journey is motivated by the precarious social conditions and escalating violence in their country. Guatemala's National Immigration Institute reports that there are 325 children among the latest group.
The crisis is hard in Honduras. All Honduran politicians are thieves. The president is the biggest thief there is. So the poor are getting poorer because they are stealing all the money. That's why we're taking this opportunity to emigrate.
Hundreds of members of the migrant caravan spent the night sleeping on the streets of the Guatemalan capital. Despite the freezing cold, Honduras citizens, with children among them, tried to get some rest before continuing their journey towards the Mexican border, with their attempts of seeking asylum in the U.S. Congress in Mexico has approved the creation of a National Guard. Our correspondent Pablo Perez brings us the latest from Mexico City.
Well, last night the Congress approved by 362 against 119 votes the constitutional amendment for the creation of the National Guard, a proposal of Andrés Manuel López Obrador's government to present an armed front against the organized crimes, the drug cartels, and also those groups that do the fuel thieving that is one of the biggest problems of Mexico nowadays. And well, this is a very, very criticized the decision because people said that this is a way of militarizing Mexico's safety, and there's a lot of evidence on the recent years since the administration of Felipe Calderón and Enrique Peña Nieto that where the army got into national security or policies or policing practices, the indexes of human rights violation raised severely. Well, the administration, Andrés Manuel López Obrador administration, said that this is going to be corrected because there's going to be a focus on human rights defense on this new force that is going to be trained and somehow managed by members of the military and the Navy. But there's still a lot of the discussion being made on the public level about if this is what he promised during his campaign. Well, when he said that he was going to take the troops out of the streets, and well, this amendment is now on the upper house and in the Senate, and they're going to vote if the amendment goes or it's gonna have to be modified to cover some of the doubts of the general people.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. A court in Ecuador has ordered the release of 5 former public officials and journalists accused of embezzlement. The public prosecutor's office found no evidence to support the claims. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has details.
Judge Silvia Sanchez has ordered the release of 5 former employees of the Communication Ministry, popularly known as SECOM. According to the judge, there was no strong evidence against them. The workers had been accused of embezzlement. A controller's report reveals SECOM's criminal responsibility for expenses and hiring. 2 of the defendants are Marco Antonio Bravo, former Undersecretary of Institutional Media, and Javier Lemos, former Administrative Coordinator.
It looked like they were forced to act after Fernando Alvarado fled. In order to demonstrate, they have to obey the law and fight against corruption, and we paid for that circumstance. The decision from the prosecutor's office was arbitrary and without doubt political in nature.
Lamentably, we were in prison for 77 days. There are 2 people that are still there waiting for the process to finish in the same way as it has with us, which is that it reveals the truth. It's good that we're out and we're with our families, but it doesn't feel good to have been in prison.
The legal team defending Marco Antonio Bravo and Jaime Lemos affirmed that political pressure generated by the case meant that the ex-SECOM employees were accused without any legal foundation.
If they want to bring charges against my clients, then they ought to do it without preventive detention. There is no reason to ask for incarceration, and it's terrible to be detained for 75 days. And then at the end, they recognize that there was no participation in the SECOM contracts. It goes against the rule of law. First of all, you investigate, then if there are charges to be brought, act. That's what should happen. Not prison first, investigate later.
It's a dangerous precedent. The court is jumping to preventative detention as a first course of action. It's a bad precedent to set in the state at a judicial level. There are going to be international consequences for the country.
Judge Silvia Sanchez ruling against the 5 former officials came following the escape of former Communications Secretary Fernando Alvarado, who fled the country in October 2018. The pre-trial hearing for a number of once prominent figures in the ministry is expected to be held on January 23rd, including Fernando Alvarado, former Communications Secretary, Pablo Llanes, former Undersecretary of Communication, Galo Pacheco, former Undersecretary of Institutional Media, and Carlos Bravo of the Gota Azul Production Company. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Large crowds marched through Buenos Aires to demand the immediate release of indigenous activist Milagro Sala. Wednesday marked 3 years of detention for Sala, who was sentenced to 13 years prison on Monday. The march included members of the Tupac Amaru Association, the Association of State Workers, and human rights organizations. They accused the local and national government of persecution.
This government of Morales and Macri came to bring hunger, came to bring unemployment, and that is why Milagro and the rest of the comrades and comrades of the Tupac are prisoners. Because they gave dignity to their people, because they built homes, because they built factories, and they built cultural centers.
And thousands of workers in Peru have taken to the streets to reject a government's reform that is hurting labor rights.
Workers do not want to be exploited anymore. Over 200 trade unions joined together to demand the government repeal a reform that has hurt labor rights. It was established as a way to supposedly promote competitiveness and productivity in the private sector.
We want to say to Mr. Vizcarra that workers and Peruvians as a whole have not given him a blank check to implement labor reforms and cut back the right of the workers. If Mr. Vizcarra does not repeal the decree, workers' unions will call for a national strike all across the country, and he will be the responsible if there is a social upheaval.
Workers will not accept attacks against their rights on labor stability, on collective negotiation, against benefits they have historically earned.
We will not allow them to take away what little we have.
He must think about the working class because we earn so little, and yet they take all the money. It shouldn't be like that.
This reform is also being questioned by several experts.
What he's doing is reducing revenues and the purchasing power of workers. Purchasing power is going to start going in the opposite direction of our economy's growth. We have to think of more competitiveness and productivity, but not at the expense of workers.
Experts assure that Peru has a 40-year history of cutting back rights. Informal work alone has grown from 25% to 75%.
If I want to end informal work, attacking something that does not generate this type of work, like the rights of the workers, will not work. It will only produce more poverty, more insecurity, but informal work will continue growing.
According to experts, one of the goals of these neoliberal policies is to destroy trade unions, which in 1990 counted for 23% of the economically active population, and today they only reach 4%.
A company owned by Peruvian President Martín Vizcarra has been linked to the Odebrecht case and will now be investigated. The Congress has approved an investigation on the consortium that built the South Interoceanic Highway with Odebrecht. Between 2006 and 2008, the consortium hired a company owned by Vizcarra. The president has denied the accusation. 30 students were arrested in Brazil at a demonstration against the rise in public transport fares in Sao Paulo. One is still being held. The police blocked the march in the center of Sao Paulo, then fired tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the protesters. Telesur witnessed the repression.
By 6 in the evening, the Avenida Paulista was under siege. The police stopped anyone from passing. As in the previous demonstration called by the Free Fares movement, a conflict broke out over the route for the march. The students were just about to announce the route when the police started firing and making arbitrary arrests.
We were peaceful and they started pepper spraying us. We were just sitting there. Nobody was making any trouble and they came at us firing tear gas.
Students, journalists, and passerbys were also hit by rubber bullets and caught in the tear gas. About 30 students were arrested. And on social media, many people complained of police harassment and insults against the students and journalists.
This bullet here was lodged in the leg of a young guy on a bicycle. He wasn't doing anything, and those pigs shot him in the leg and he was bleeding badly.
In spite of the repression and the rain, the Free Fare movement continued with its second march of the year. They are protesting against the increase in fares from 4 reales to 4 reales 30, an increase that coincides with President Bolsonaro's cut in the minimum wage.
This increase is above inflation. It's wrong. It shouldn't happen. It's the second increase introduced by Doria, who was mayor and is now the governor. It's important to protest so people know that we can only change things by struggling.
The police violence came just a day after the Brazilian president signed a decree to relax controls on gun ownership, a belligerent measure that does nothing to solve people's economic difficulties.
You don't have to be a genius to see that things will get worse. Violent deaths will increase. Housewives and heads of households don't need weapons. We don't need them. That's what the police are for.
The repression began before the march even set off, a clear violation of the right to protest. In response, the Free Fair movement is calling another protest for next Tuesday.
The Campesino Workers Union Tupac Katari in Bolivia has thrown their support behind President Evo Morales in this year's upcoming elections. Primary elections in the Andean nation are set for the end of January, followed by general elections in October. Meanwhile, the implementation of universal health care has been supported by citizens. It will benefit more than 5 million Bolivians who do not have medical insurance. A landslide at a landfill near the Bolivian city of La Paz is threatening local residents' well-being. There are concerns that hazardous waste will enter the water supply and even spill close to homes. Community leaders have said that the black liquid emerging from the landfill is dangerous. Municipal authorities are reportedly making plans to prevent contamination.
It's a high-magnitude landslide. As you can appreciate, it's too much. Imagine, just beyond the edge where you can see with the cameras, as you can see, there are more cracks beginning to open. And beyond that, residue is leaking out. That black liquid is extremely contaminating.
Heavy rains have flooded northern Argentina, killing 4 and leaving farmers with $2 billion in losses. Around 2 million hectares of soybeans have been destroyed and thousands have been forced to evacuate the area. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The international community has condemned the Nairobi attacks in a solidarity message sent to the Kenyan people. Embassies from different countries in Kenya and other countries have sent in their condolences. The attack on a hotel complex claimed 21 lives and left several others injured.
We're shocked and saddened at this attack on the peace-loving people of Kenya, and we condemn it utterly. Terrorism has no place in what we do in Africa, and it is a shame that this happened. Now, the African Union is in full support of all Kenya's efforts to stamp out terrorism and to make sure that this does not happen again, and also to support Kenya in looking for the culprits and to addressing the issues involving that and to take them to justice, let justice prevail.
Around 70 people arrested in the protests against fuel prices in Zimbabwe have appeared in court. So far, more than 600 people have been arrested in connection with the protests. The nationwide protests were triggered by President Emerson Mnangagwa's announcement that fuel prices were doubling. Demonstrations left at least 5 people killed and many more injured. And in Johannesburg, discussions begun for an inquiry into the death of a former Rwandan intelligence chief murdered in South Africa. Vincent Karegeya was found dead in December 2013 in a hotel suite in Johannesburg. The local court is discussing whether an investigation should proceed. The Karegeya family's legal team argues that there is overwhelming evidence that the murder was politically motivated.
It will help them to, even the country, Rwanda would know that they have no right to come and kill the people in the country that is not theirs. It should be a lesson even for Rwandese to stand up for themselves and say this is not the right thing to be done, and there should be sanctions on that country.
Western classical music is thriving in South Africa's black communities. It was first brought by missionaries spreading Christianity in the 1700s. African religious practices and rituals slowly declined as the Bible replaced the former way of life. Many decades later, Africans embraced Western classical music and it became a part of their lives.
She is a third generation in a family of classical musicians. Esther Homo makes a living as a pianist, a talent she developed in Soweto where she grew up. Her repertoire includes composers like Mozart, Bach and many other renowned European masters. But she says South Africa has produced some of her favorite composers and she enjoys playing their music.
Namia is the first one because this was playing it's the first piano accompaniment score that I saw, and it had different characters in it. A bit of jazz, a bit of classical, a bit of African music, and I loved the combination of the three.
South Africa has also produced internationally acclaimed classical musicians. Operatic soprano Priti Yende is now a household name in major opera houses around the world. Most local classical musicians have to leave the country to reach the peak of their careers. Esther believes it's because there isn't enough investment in the arts.
It shouldn't be happening. I think our government should be respecting artists more, this brain drain should have been, stopped a while ago. And, music students in performance get frustrated if they don't get gigs. And, sometimes they are shunned, by the very musicians that are supposed to give them the backing.
Western classical music may well be the legacy of a violent colonial past that took so much away from the indigenous people of South Africa. But today, the music plays with deep appreciation after becoming part of a history that raised women like Esther. Matiwa Mahlachi, Telesur, Pretoria.
The British Labour Party could support a second referendum on Brexit if a no-deal scenario seems likely. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he'll only hold talks with Prime Minister May on Brexit if she rules out a no-deal exit. The Prime Minister continues to search for a last-minute exit deal, but has shown little sign of compromise.
Lovely to see you. But if the government remains intransigent, if support for Labour's alternative is blocked for party advantage and the country is facing the potential disaster of no deal, our duty will then be to look at other options which we've set out in our conference motion, including that of a public vote.
And finally, a new exhibit at the Paris Aquarium in France is hoping to raise awareness about climate change. It includes 45 species of jellyfish floating in 24 pools. It aims to show how climate change threatens marine life and specifically how warmer seas affect jellyfish populations.
Et pour toutes ces raisons, les méduses sont des marqueurs des dérèglements climatiques.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.